Well, I was in the truck stop the other day, grabbed a copy of this magazine that's available up here in Canada in the truck stops, and it's free and for good reason. The headline is "Payday: Carriers Increasing Driver Pay to Take Advantage of Strong Market." And further down they say the best fleets increased the wages by 3.61 cents per mile to a total of $21.66 for a 600-mile day. Well, 600-mile day, how often do you get a perfect running day? Virtually never. And then further on, the headlines are, everybody is upping their pay. Everybody. Surveys show that 59% of recruiters expect driver compensation to increase in the first quarter. And by now, your alarm should be going off, because you've got to know, if you've been in this industry at any period of time at all, that something's going wrong. So first, what you've got to do is look at the publication itself. Now, it's free, and it's free for a good reason, because, as I say, nobody would pay a nickel for the thing. Well, you wonder, well, how do they make their money to publish then? Well, they make their money from the advertising money that big carriers pay them to advertise for recruiting. So this is a recruiting paper, basically, with a couple of articles in the front of it to make it look like a paper rather than a recruiting tool. But really, it's a recruiting tool. So the articles that you read in this paper are basically propaganda, for the most part, to support the carriers that are paying for this recruiting tool. So let's look at it for a second. 3.6 cents a mile on a 600-mile day, which virtually never happens, between customs time, stuck in traffic, stuck at the loading dock, fueling up, taking the half-hour break in the States, all that stuff. You hardly ever get a 600-mile day unless you're in Nebraska or Wyoming. So even if you did, you're talking about a $21.66 increase for the day on a perfect day. Well, that's before taxes. After taxes, depending on where you live, you'll put somewhere between $15 to $18 in your pocket, which isn't even enough to cover your breakfast. It's a brainwashing trick to make drivers think that this is a big deal, that they're getting a big pay increase, and it's just not the case. 3.6 cents per mile increase adds up to sweet tweet, basically, at the end of the month, by the time you take your taxes out of it. Now, Landline magazine quoted a realistic figure the other day, and their take was the average driver pay was, and they had crunched the numbers, in 1980, when deregulation became a fact of life, the average driver's pay was $37,000. With the cost of living increase built in, the average driver's pay today should be $110,000, was the way their math worked out. And I believe that's accurate math. I ran a few numbers myself, and that's pretty much the figure that I came up with too, when you build in the cost of living increase, because it goes up, roughly 3 to 4% every year. So let's say you haven't had a raise for 7 years. 4 times 7, it should have gone up 28% since 7 years ago. Has it done that? No. It's mind spin, brainwashing. Politicians became experts at putting a spin on things and making it look different or better than it somehow truly was. And now that's come to the trucking industry too. So now these carriers that have failed to pay their drivers enough all these years and now have run out of drivers, and there's a driver shortage, are trying to put a spin on the press. They want to give them as little money as absolutely possible because it cuts into their profits. So they're trying to make a little minuscule increase look like a big deal. And that's propaganda, because it's not a big deal. It's so far from what it needs to be that it's laughable, but you've got to realize this. And that's why Landline's figures are so much more accurate. we as drivers, not talking owner-operators here, as drivers, these days with the cost of living from 1980 to now, we should be at over $100,000 take-home pay. And as you know, we're nowhere near that. So it's kind of ironic because, you know, I'm sure when you were a kid, you were taught that you treat people the way you would like to be treated. My grandmother used to say that all the time. So here are these carriers now that haven't treated their drivers right since God knows forever when, 20 years back or so. And now they want you to get the warm fuzzies and come and work for them after they've been screwing you on your pay for 20 years. And it's kind of ironic. And the biggest ones are the worst offenders. There's an ad in the one paper I saw for a $50,000 sign-on bonus to U.S. Express. And you've got to laugh at that because just last month we were looking at U.S. Express and they seem to be the worst offender of this, the one-way bus ticket to the recruiting program. So they were the worst offenders, and there's all sorts of carriers out there doing it now apparently, but they would bus you in, and if they decided not to hire you, they just left you on the street. They wouldn't even bus you back to your home. This is the same carrier that's offering a $50,000 sign-on bonus for teams. So if you can't even trust them to bus you home, how can you trust them to pay you a $50,000 sign-on bonus? They've sunk their own boat. You can't believe a word most of these mega carriers say. So you've got to be careful. Now, on the bright side, and this is big news, I thought, there's a company out of Quebec called CH Express, and they've announced that they're going to start paying their highway drivers by the hour. And that's huge news. Huge news for this industry because these guys don't run local. They're a long-haul flatbed carrier. The new guys coming in start at $21 an hour while they're on the road driving. And if they're in on-duty time but not moving, like unloading or tarping or something like that, they're at $18 an hour. If you stay with these guys up to 5 years, you're then at $28 an hour when you're driving and still at the 18 when you're tarping or unloading or something like that. But that's huge. And here's a company that's not afraid to take the step forward, do the right thing, and they want to do it because they want their drivers happy and they want to keep their drivers. And I can tell you, they suspect that it'll cut down on turnover. I can guarantee them it'll cut down on their turnover. They won't have any turnover. Drivers will be beating a path to the door of CH Express to work for them because they pay by the hour. Now, if this carrier can do it, they can all do it. These guys have done the math. They're not going to go broke paying their drivers. Everybody, all these carriers can afford to do it. They're just trying to avoid doing it like the plague because they're just too cheap to lay out the extra money to keep good people. And I have a huge problem with that. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that carriers have become so desperate now for drivers that they've entered the brainwashing industry. So that's what they're trying to do to convince you to sign on. And they still haven't mastered the trick of keeping you there after you've signed on, and that's why the turnover's 90% or better. So be aware. Don't believe the stuff that you read in these recruiting papers because it's just sugarcoating, but it's anything but the truth. So be aware. Keep your eyes open. If you're at a good carrier now, don't jump ship. So be aware. Drive safe, and I'll see you on the back haul.